Hello everyone, this is Celine from Blue Calla Patterns. Welcome to part 2 of the Boronia Bowler handbag. Today we're going to work on the exterior assembly of your bag. This will be fairly quick to sew up. All you're going to need are your two exterior pieces interfaced, your foam interfacing piece, your 4 strap connectors, and your 4 1-inch rectangle rings, and your overlay V piece interfaced with your purse feet installed. I'm also going to be adding a metal tag, a decorative metal tag. I'll show you that once everything else is assembled. I usually put the tag last. Alright, so we're going to get started. To start, we're going to attach our exterior pieces to the foam interfacing. You're going to attach each piece at the opposite ends of your foam. So I'm just going to place them. Make sure that the curved edges at the top are aligned with your foam. And then I'm just going to clip this in place all the way around. Now you'll note that I don't have my center line showing on the top here. I actually have it on the underside of the foam interfacing because I want to use it later on during the final assembly to help find the center when I'm sewing up my bottom corners. Alright, so I have these pieces clipped and I'm going to also I'm just going to add a couple of pins here because I'm also going to base the bottom edge of my exterior pieces to the foam because I don't want them moving when I'm attaching the overlay or I'm attaching my strap connectors. And unfortunately my main machine is a straight stitch, so I'm going to base stitch this with my Janome. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to base stitch all the way around the top curved edges with a zigzag stitch, and that helps to, it kind of flattens the layers and it reduces the bulk. And then along the bottom edges, I'm just going to use a straight basting stitch just to hold it in place. I think some people prefer using a basting spray and really sticking it down to the foam, but I just use my machine and I base stitch it in place. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and when I come back I'll just show you what that looks like. I've now finished basting my exterior pieces to the foam interfacing. I'm just going to flip it over and show you. I've got a straight line of basting here along the bottom edge of your exterior piece and along the top curved edges. I've used a zigzag stitch. I used the widest zigzag stitch setting on my machine, and it ends up being about, I guess, about 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little bit less. So you make sure your zigzag stitch isn't wider than a 1/4 inch seam allowance, because that's what we're going to be using when we're attaching this to the zipper. Another tip when you're when you're base stitching the bottom edge here, I kind of, I make sure when I'm sewing that I'm sort of tugging a bit on my fabric here, just because I don't want any bunching or wrinkling in this part of the bag. I want it all nice and smooth. And then before I start attaching my connectors, I also like to just press, because sometimes you'll have some slight wrinkling around the zigzag stitching, and I just like to have it really nice and smooth before I attach my connectors. So the next step, I'm going to just set this aside for now, and I'm going to get my connectors ready. Now, there's a couple of ways to do this. I prefer to not use glue or tape for this part because I don't want my stitching to mess up when I'm attaching these to the bag. Some people are fine with that. It's really personal preference. What I prefer to do is just fold these straps in towards the center and sew them as I'm folding. So I'm going to start by drawing a line directly in the center. So the straps are 2 inches wide. That means your center line should be exactly 1 inch in from each of the longer sides. So I'm just going to do that for 4 pieces. Now I'm just going to take these over to my machine and I'm going to show you how I sew these up. Now for each connector, I'm going to start by, I'm going to start at the top edge here. I'm going to start by folding in towards the center line, and I'm going to sew here up with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from that center line, and I'm going to work my way all the way down. And then when I get to the bottom, I'm just going to rotate and I'm going to sew across, folding this part in. So I'm going to show you that right now. Okay, now that I'm down to the bottom, I keep my needle in the down position, and then I just fold the bottom part here, go across, and then I just continue the same thing along the other side. And then there you go, you have one connector sewn. And then you have the raw edges meeting at the center on the back. So you're going to go ahead and do the same thing for the other two. The other 3 connectors. Now I've got all of my connectors sewn. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to use some double-sided tape. You can use glue if you prefer. I prefer tape, and I'm just going to slide one connector through one of your rectangle rings, and then you're going to fold it down until this part of your connector is 5.5 inches long. And then I'm just going to use some clips. Now when you fold it over, you want to make sure that you're looking at your raw edges at the center on this side, which is going to be the wrong side of your connector. I just clip the very edges. Where's the end of my double-sided tape? There it is. And then I just put a piece. Now don't put tape too close to your ring where you're going to be sewing, and to also stop about 1/2 inch from the bottom edge of the ring, of the connector as well. Alright, leave this. Now you're going to do the same for the rest, and then we're going to start sewing them to our bag's exterior. Before you attach the connectors, you're going to want to mark the centers of your bag's exterior. You're going to fold it in half, wrong sides together, and you're going to make a mark at the bottom edge of your exterior pieces and at the top edge on the right side. And you're going to do that also on this side, at this end. Now to find the proper location for the installation of your connectors, I use one of these giant quilting rulers, and I place it with the center marks at the 2.5 inch mark. And I'm also going to align the bottom edge of my connector so that it is 1 5/8 from the bottom edge of the exterior A piece. So that's about this location right here. I'm going to remove these for now, they're in the way. And then you can just make sure that the edge of your connector is lined up. So the positioning of your connectors is 2.5 inches over from the center marks and 1 5/8 of an inch from the bottom edge of your exterior piece. Now I'm going to remove my tape backing, and I'm going to glue this in place, and then I'm going to bring it over to my machine, and I am going to start sewing the connector from the bottom edge. I'm going to sew all the way up the side of the connector with a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm going to get as close as I can to my rectangle ring, and I'm going to sew across, and then I'm going to rotate, and I'm going to sew along the other edge with, again, a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now here we are. I'm sewing the first connector onto my bag. I'm starting at the bottom edge, and I'm using a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now if you're using vinyl, you're going to want to use a walking foot at this step. I'm using cork, and I find my regular foot handles cork pretty well. Then I'm getting as close as I can to my rectangle ring without having my foot interfere. Sew across, and then I rotate again. Sorry, I'm going to do one more stitch here. Okay, and then I'm sew all the way down, and hopefully you can see this. There you go. I have one connector. I'm going to go ahead and repeat the same steps, and I'm going to sew the remaining 3 connectors to my bag's exterior. Alright, I now have all of my 4 strap connectors sewn onto the exterior of my bag. The last step will be to attach my my overlay. Now, it might pass a little bit on the sides here. That's not a big deal. Just center it, and you can even refer to your lines. If you remember the lines that we have on the wrong side, just make sure that they're lined up, and then you can clip it in place. And turn it around. And I'm going to line up the lines on this side as well. Now, this is a good time if you're worried about bulk in the corners for your machine. Now's a good time to just trim the seam allowance out of the foam at the corners here. My machine handles layers quite well, so I'm not going to bother, but if you're concerned about bulk with your machine, now would be the time to trim away some of that foam. Oh, you know what? I realize I forgot to put my double-sided tape. So you can use glue again here. I prefer to use double-sided tape, but I'm going to just going to add a bit here and here. Now I don't put it too close to the top edge where I'm going to be sewing my overlay to my bag's exterior. And I also like to add a tiny bit on the ends here because I don't want that part to shift when I'm sewing my overlay to my exterior. Alright, I'm just going to peel the tape backing. Alright, once again, I'm just going to, before I press this down, I'm just going to make sure that my center lines match. Yep, looks good. And then I'm just going to glue it in place. And then just a little bit over here. Alright. Now press from the center out. You don't want it to be bunched here in the center. Great. So now we're going to sew the overlay to the body of the bag. You're going to sew along this top curved edge with a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Don't rush it, go slowly, because it will really, your stitching here will really show on the bag's exterior, and you want it to look nice. And then what I'm also going to do, if you haven't trimmed your seam allowance here, I'm going to actually do a little zigzag stitching just to make it less bulky at the corner of the bags. I'm now sewing the overlay to the exterior of my bag. Like I mentioned previously, you want to sew very slowly because you have some curves that you want to work around. I'm also using my walking foot this time because I really want the cork to feed evenly and produce some very nice top stitching. Now when I get to this corner, I do pretty much one stitch at a time. I lift the foot one stitch at a time. And I really don't rush it because I want it to look as nice as possible. Now same with this corner here. I lift and I just do pretty much one stitch at a time. I'm sort of lucky because I have one of those knee lift bars, so I don't have to keep reaching back here to lift my foot. Okay. My camera's too close to my machine, but yeah, I'll put it underneath so you can see here that I've finished my top stitching here. Now I'm going to do the same for the other side, and I'm also going to just base stitch this area here so that none of the layers are shifting during assembly. Alright, so now I have my bag exterior almost complete. The only thing I'm going to add now are some rivets to my strap connectors. Now those are optional. You don't really need to have them, but I really like the look of them. So I'm not going to show you setting them because it's way too loud for, I use a regular just the regular anvil. I don't have a fancy press. And I'm not going to set them because it's way too loud for the video, but I do usually put one rivet in the center of each connector, 3/4 of an inch down from the bottom of the rectangle ring. And I do that for all 4 connectors. And then I also would like to put in a metal tag. Now the good part about this bag is that you have 2 identical sides, so you can pick and choose which side turned out the best and make that the front of your bag and install your tag on that side. Alright, so I'm not going to show you the whole installation of the tag because it really depends on what type of tag you're using. But in terms of placement for the tag, you should have exactly 5 inches between your connectors. Yep. So I think this side looks nice. So what I do is I use my big ruler and I measure usually 1 inch from the top edge of the overlay, and I just use the back plate, and this is how I just mark the location of my prongs, and then I cut them out and I install my tag. If you want to make it extra sturdy, you can put a scrap of Peltex in the back before you put on your washer. And then install your rivets, and then we're done part 2.